Breathe deep.
Week 2. Putting the examples into context, examining why they are here and what do they have to say. What thesis is Banham trying to establish? How is he framing the work in the previous 11 chapters? Is it prescriptive or descriptive? How do we put to use what he is trying to tell us? Last week, we looked at them individually, and now we will join them together and look at the narrative they constitute. I've drawn out a way to map the projects Banham references and see how they address the topic of environmental control in regards to these three variables: power, structure, and knowledge. My understanding is that chapters 12 and 13 tell much of the same story through slightly different lenses. This feels particularly evident when looking at both editions of the book simultaneously, because we can see certain sections that were in chapter 12 in the first edition have been moved to chapter 13 in the second. Initially, the whole picture was contained in chapter 12, a range of methods, but in the second edition, the importance of knowledge and intelligence for the outcomes of environmental control was given largely to chapter 13, A Breath of Intelligence, which leaves the power versus structure dichotomy solely to chapter 12. Our examination of the projects last week has informed their placement on this diagram. I'll quickly go over that and then try to tease out what they can all tell us. You can't forget to Knoll. The spacesuit is high on both power and knowledge. The AEC pavilion is furthest away from structure. The Las Vegas Strip is definitely power heavy, not so intelligent, perhaps. Inmost sits somewhere in the middle here, the Willis Faber Dumas office in close proximity, but a less knowledgeable approach. The vernacular Sydney row houses are structure heavy, but quite misguided. Thatcher and Thompson's homes are paradoxically smart but unintelligible. And St. George's School is high on both structure and knowledge. This looks and feels just about right for our map, so now we can take a look at the pieces once more. Starting from power and moving towards structure. Banham has a very high opinion of the AEC Pavilion. It is perhaps the closest built work to his famous bubble drawing. He references this project mainly to illustrate how it makes architecture directly out of exploitation of a new technology. It presents a total reversal of the traditional roles of systems and structure. It is an environment which would not exist, and certainly be less well-tempered, without the exertion of mechanical power. The spacesuit is similar regarding its extreme reliance on power, yet without a rigid skeleton, the astronaut would also surely be dead. It represents the pinnacle of environmental control, humans regulating an environment where no life was meant to be. Banham's main reason for including this as an example, though, is to illustrate how less serious of a problem the indoor-outdoor separation is for buildings. The suits needed to be so complex because otherwise the inhabitant would perish. Here on Earth, the worst that could happen is some discomfort. This gives architecture much more agency with which to tackle the problem. We all know how Banham feels about Las Vegas. He is particularly impressed by the Strip and the way in which it defines space and volume using nothing but pure environmental power manifested through colored light. Perhaps this example belongs even further to the left of the AEC Pavilion, but I have placed it here because the actual enclosures behind the glittery lights do not subscribe to the same rules. Banham references Las Vegas not only because he loves it, but also to make the point that a creative mind can stretch the potential of these new technological developments in joyful ways past the conceptions of typical architecture. The Inmos factor sits somewhere in the middle here, because although very knowledgeable about the building's own needs, it is in many ways agnostic of its context. The building is included in the book as an example of what can result out of a design process that begins with the interior environment and works outward from there. The aesthetics of the project are perhaps misleading, but the point is we are in an era where this kind of design is increasingly easy. A simple computer simulation a secondary student could run can give you the data necessary to design an entire project around an abstract bubble of tempered space. The Willis Faber Dumas offices are quite similar, though less concerned with their environmental regulation than Inmos. Banham mentions it for its clever use of mirrored glazing, which serves a dual aesthetic and regulatory purpose. It proves how far glass has advanced technologically in recent years, and some of its newer intelligent properties allow for a very thin structure to temper an interior environment quite well. The Thatcher and Thompson homes are built quite well, and are very sensitive to their climate and orientation. However, all of this is masked behind an Edwardian or Victorian wrapper. Not that there's anything wrong with those in a stylistic sense, but it results in passive design choices which remain ineligible to the occupant, likely causing inefficiencies in operation. Banham includes these projects to stress the importance of occupant awareness. There is little to no need for complicated and automated mechanical systems if the person occupying the space knows what to do in order to alter the indoor conditions. Sydney's row houses express another lack of insight on the end of the designer. This vernacular typology was tuned to the harsh Australian sun, but only on one side. And as this became the prominent style of housing in the city, people forgot to question those choices made in the previous era. As a result, half of the homes have their inadequate rear facade facing the harsh solar exposure. Banham uses this example to stress the point that no matter how old and conventional a typology may be, we must never stop questioning what is best. The advent and incorporation of new technologies only heightens this. As with advancements come new affordances. As architects, we must never fall back onto what our ancestors thought was best. We must continually strive for our own solutions and best practices. St. George's School exemplifies this well. Banham includes it as an example of a designer's intelligence liberating a project from the confines of typical mechanical regulatory systems. Emsley Morgan had the agency to say no to the engineers, and prove that he knew a better way. Very astute knowledge of climate and context allowed him to have such self-confidence, and Banham firmly believes all architects must learn from this to make sense of the huge array of choices and environmental method available to them now. By arranging all of the examples on this scale, we can start to understand the range of approaches present in the book and in architecture at large. The message Banham is trying to convey in these chapters is that the end, or anywhere in the middle, is totally acceptable. The important aspect is this third axis, the intelligence and sophistication with which an architect approaches the problem. Banham lays out some pitfalls to be aware of, and then inspires us to have the knowledge and self-confidence to determine the best solution on our own terms. We can either understand the trajectory of architecture's relationship with building systems to be freeing, allowing us to design whatever we want, wherever we want, or we can see it as being limited and constrained by the mysterious terms of environmental regulation. Banham argues we have lost the skills to control our own profession, and only through a mastery of this knowledge once again can we reclaim our agency. The best approach is usually not one that requires the most advanced mechanical systems, but knowing what is available to you allows one to make the best choice for any given situation. As Banham writes, the greatest of all environmental powers is thought. We cannot let ourselves become subservient to the machines, to tradition or convention, or to laziness.
Don't sit down, it's time to day another